Guys, today we're going to be giving you a full breakdown of Oathkeepers. Most notably, the massive change to Oathkeepers with Season of the Deep. Now, we already pushed down a build for Oathkeepers, but we know that didn't give you the full picture. So today we're going to be going through and diving into pretty much every popular bow in the game. Now, if you're wondering what change we're talking about, Oathkeeper now not only allows you to hold a full draw indefinitely, which, by the way, also speeds up the draw speed just slightly. But now, when fully drawn, bows gain a bonus to damage against combatants that increases as you hold the draw, but deactivates after a few seconds. Now, this is shown by a segmented meter on the left side of your screen when you're at full draw. You get a damage increase at each tier of this meter. Now, one full tier is 38% increase in damage, 2 full tiers is 75%, 3 full tiers is 112%, and 4 full tiers is 150%. Now, if you fire the arrow before a single tier is full, you just deal base perfect draw damage with no increase here from Oathkeeper. So by no means does this actually stifle your DPS. You can literally draw and release arrows one after another and just occasionally hold a draw to reach that maximum damage. Now, the bow we immediately rushed to try this with was Wishender. It seemed like a very good fit solely because of the damage it already deals with Broadhead. It's the hardest hitting bow in the game apart from Leviathan's Breath, and it's able to tear down barrier champions like they're butter. Plus, it deals 10% increase in damage against taken enemies. Now, what Oathkeeper does for Wishender is that it gives you options for dealing with multiple enemy types because Wishender alone is already good at chunking down enemy health. And to be honest with you guys, Wishender is kind of overkill for most ads. You're mainly using it to pierce shields and hit majors for big damage. Oathkeeper's damage buff only increases this damage while rewarding you for lining up those perfect crit shots. As the longer you're in that full draw, the more tiers of Oathkeeper you feel. So if you're tracking something like a moving target, juking wizards, or sprinting knights, or jumping a ball, don't worry. Hold that draw. You're gonna get even more damage. And keep in mind, it's not something you have to really pay attention to. It's just a passive buff. Even if you shoot the arrow at tier 2 or tier 3, it's still a nice chunk here of added damage. Unfortunately though, the damage increase does not affect the broadhead damage. Only the initial arrow is buffed. So what actually ends up happening is you lose a significant chunk of DPS if you're holding your arrow for the full charge every time. And in some ways, it's just better to just fire every arrow one after another. And if you're against a target that's easy to land crits on, then just use Wishender like you've always used it. It's only when you're playing peak oriented, where you're using cover to your advantage and only peeking to hit maximum damage, where Oathkeepers and Wishender really starts to make sense, especially considering Wishender grants you true sight, enabling you to track movement of your enemies through walls. And we went into detail on this one in our review. And I know overall DPS is slumped because this buff does not apply to Broadhead itself, but the damage buff is still appreciated here. Now do remember though, Oathkeeper's charge does run out if you hold a full charge for longer than 3 seconds. So you do have a window of time here to fire that max damage arrow. But after playing with our Oathkeeper Wishender build for a while though, guys, I could tell you there is a playstyle around this that I think people will enjoy. Now we touched on these damage values the other day in our build video, but these are the damage values versus Carl with Wishender and Broadhead. And you see right here where Broadhead remains unchanged. It's only the main arrow that's actually seeing that buff, which is a significant buff. Now, with that being said, the rest of this video is going to be us on a quest to find the best bow for Oathkeepers, which takes us to Verglas Curve. Verglas Curve comes with 2 perks. Hell Barrage, where the final blows with this weapon grant stasis arrows, and your next hipfire shot will fire all of them in a single volley. And Hell Storm, where stasis arrows freeze targets on contact and create stasis crystals when affecting the environment. Now, we've had a build on this already, Stasis Curves, and it's some beautiful synergy, guys, because literally the perk and the trait itself feed back into each other. Now, the main gameplay loop with Verglas is to score kills to tally up those Hellstorm arrows, then to hipfire all of them at once to create tons of crystals to then shatter for massive shatter damage. But again, you could keep looping this back into each other as long as you are getting kills. Now, while Oathkeepers does buff the regular arrow shot, it unfortunately does not affect the hipfire Hellstorm arrow damage, nor does it affect the shatter damage at all. And when you want to be getting as many kills as quickly as you can to stack up those Hellstorm arrows, holding onto your draw really isn't something you want to do here with Verglas. And since Oathkeepers doesn't buff the main loop of this build, we can't really recommend pairing these two together. There's just not enough benefits, and it kind of works against how you use this bow. Regardless though, here are the damage numbers nonetheless, and up against Carl, you see the damage values here at base base crits all the way from tier 1 to tier 4. Now keep in mind, Oathkeeper's damage buff does however stack with the damage increase you get versus frozen targets, but you don't have to freeze with Verglas to get these numbers. Freezing from any source works, and here's some of the damage numbers on that. So base crits on a frozen Carl, 16,647, and from tier 1 to tier 4, you see these big increases when Carl is frozen. Again, that's just a flat buff overall, nothing really significant. The main thing is that this bow just doesn't synergize the way we want it to, and that's okay, because we have a lot of other bows in the game, which brings us to Monarque. Now Monarque comes equipped with the trait Poison Arrows, where arrows fired quickly after a full draw becomes poison arrows. And precision hits with poison arrows stuns combatants and spreads poison to nearby enemies. Again, this can stun overload champions. Honestly, one of the best bows in PvE and one of the most annoying bows in PvP. Now the catalyst gives you Unrelenting, where rapidly defeating combatants triggers health regeneration. Now when it comes to actually rocking Oathkeepers with Monarque, it really just depends on how good you are at firing perfectly drawn arrows. The entire reason Monarque is used and why it's so popular is because of the poison arrows, which rely on you firing those perfect draws. These cause poison and will then spread poison on precision hits. Oathkeepers can hold that perfect draw indefinitely, meaning every arrow you fire with Monarque will cause poison no matter how long you hold that draw. You don't have to worry about letting the arrow go at the right moment. This could be good for peak firing in harder content. Maybe you're trying to get your health back before you peak, and it's always nice to peek out and always have that guaranteed poison when you're finally able to peek and fire. In this scenario, holding your draw will give Oathkeepers that damage bonus as well. However, here is the unfortunate part. It does not buff the poison damage at all. So if you're already good at releasing perfect drawn arrows from Monarque, again, we don't really recommend pairing this either. It would have been amazing to actually see that poison damage increase with Oathkeepers, but Bungie had other plans. And you're starting to see like the trend here amongst all our different bows and their secondary effects not being increased. Now, Monarque damage versus Carl though, again, base crit 12,902 with that poison tick damage of 1,282 per tick. Stays the same, but from tier 1 to tier 4 of Oathkeepers, you do see that increase in damage for Monarque, which is pretty nice. And keep in mind, it all comes down to your playstyle. Can you utilize Oathkeepers with Monarque? Yes. But do you like to rapid fire it? I personally like to, but again, maybe you're playing solo and sitting behind cover and then peeking with that super shot. That may be a playstyle just for you. Now, Hierarchy of Needs. Hierarchy of Needs comes with the trait Guidance Ring. By the way, this is the Spire exotic weapon, and its trait reads precision hits and final blows build Guidance Ring energy, and opposing guardians grant additional energy. And at full charge, hip firing creates a Guidance Ring. An Apollonic Tangent, where arrows fired through a Guidance Ring releases seeking projectiles, which do increased damage based on distance travel. Now, we did testing a while back on this bow. This bow is a strange one. I love it. I want it to be good, but the reality is there's a lot of setup required. But if you do set it up, and if you have other people on your fire team using this bow, you can make it work. Now, the beginning loop with this bow is similar to that of Verglas, where you're trying to score kills to build up charges. And in this case, it's Guidance Ring energy instead of that Verglas ice arrows. Now, once you get full charges, you hip fire the arrow and it will create this orange ring of light that you can shoot through, as well as your teammates. And firing through it creates these 3 seeking projectiles. Now, if you were hoping for an exotic to come around and make this bow actually good or worth using, you're gonna have to wait longer, because Oathkeepers does not buff the seeking projectiles. The entire purpose of this bow does not benefit from Oathkeepers in any way. Matter of fact, it works against how you want to use this bow, which is literally you releasing arrow after arrow as fast as you can. Granted, no one's really hurting about this. It's not like people are going out of their way to get Hierarchy of Needs. I love the bow, I really do. Primarily because it's the only exotic that has ever dropped for me on day 1 for any raid dungeon ever. Destiny 1 to Destiny 2. My RNG has never blessed me. Bungie finally blessed me with an exotic. That being Hierarchy of Needs on day 1, and it turns out to literally be one of the worst exotics ever. Now, damage values here though, it does increase the bow damage itself. You see it here at base crit against Carl, 13,055 with tiers 1 through 4. Now, I know at this point in the video, you're probably thinking, Cross, all of this sounds terrible. Sounds like there's literally no synergy. But wait, we have more bows. Don't give up yet. Which takes us to Trinity Ghoul. Now, Trinity Ghoul is the ad clearing king of exotic bows. It really is. Its perk Lightning Rod gives your next shot after precision kill chain lightning capabilities. Its intrinsic trait Split Electron fires an arrow that splits when released, and aiming down sights and fully drawing the bow both decreases the spread. Now, the catalyst makes it so that Lightning Rod will trigger from any arc damage final blow. It's beautiful to watch. Unfortunately though, guys, it does not benefit at all from perfectly drawn arrows besides what base perfect draw does for damage. And usually you're kind of firing this bow at the ground or just at a group of ants to chain that lightning, which easily disintegrates everything. And honestly, you want to just fire the bow as quickly as you can. Oathkeepers does not buff that chain lightning damage, which is sad because we could have had something beautiful here. So like every bow we have mentioned so far outside of Wish Ender, we do not recommend Oathkeepers with Trinity Ghoul. Now base crit damage against Carl, 3 arrows at 4,385 damage for a total of 13,155. Now the base lightning rod damage, which keep in mind does not change. The only thing that's being amplified here is the 3 shots itself, but not with lightning rod, which takes us to Ticuu's Divination. Surely Ticuu's here can give us something, some sort of hope. Unfortunately, this one ended up being pretty complicated to just kind of nail down. Ticuu's perk is Causality Arrows and Sacred Flame. Sacred Flame states that hip firing this weapon fires 3 tracking projectiles, and targets marked by these projectiles explode upon death or when struck by another Sacred Flame explosion. Now, Causality Arrows states that arrows fired while aiming down sights cause Sacred Flames to instantly detonate, and precision hits with perfectly drawn arrows increases the power of this detonation. Now, the catalyst makes it so that the perfectly drawn arrow that detonates Sacred Flames increases arrow damage, and striking targets unaffected by Sacred Flame will instead refresh Causality's arrow's duration. Now, there's a lot of perfect draw wording here that will benefit from Oathkeeper's infinite perfect draw perk. It has that going for it. Being able to always have that perfect draw no matter how long you hold back an arrow guarantees an increased damage Sacred Flame detonation, and also guarantees netting stacks of Causality arrows, which is Ticuu's own damage buff. Now, this Causality arrow buff can stack up to 6 times and also stacks with Oathkeeper's damage buff. Now, here are some damage values solely based on Causality's arrows buffs. Base crit 11,682. Base hipfire damage is 731 times 3 of 2,193 damage. Now, base Sacred Flame explosions 8,539 with the perfect draw crit Sacred Flame explosion of 17,077. This explosion is not buffed by Oathkeepers. Now, crit with Causality times 1 jumps up by 17%, times 2 36%, times 3 57%, times 4 78%, and times 5 and times 6 are both capped at 101%. There's never been a difference between times 5 and times 6 going all the way back to when this bow first came out. Now, the hipfire damage with Causality from times 1 to times 6 shows these same damage buffs: 17, 36%, 57%, all the way up to 101%. Now, we're pointing out the hipfire damage here because hipfiring is key to Ticuu's gameplay loop, as it's how you prime enemies with Sacred Flame. So you can see here with max stacks of Causality arrows, you're getting basically double damage with Ticuu's, but getting here takes time. You have to prime and detonate Sacred Flames 5 times to get to that double damage phase, and the Causality arrows buff only lasts for about 4 to 5 seconds before all stacks fall off. To refresh this duration, you either have to detonate Sacred Flames or you have to shoot an enemy unaffected by Sacred Flame. It's a lot to pay attention to already, especially if you're not used to Ticuu's gameplay loop. And this is not even adding in Oathkeeper's time window, which complicates things even more. Let's first take a look though at Oathkeeper's buff and what it does to base Ticuu's without the Causality buff. Here are the damage values here of base crit of 11,682 and base hipfire damage of 731 times 3 for a total of 2,193 damage. Now, crits at each tier of Oathkeepers amps up our damage all the way up to 29,204 at Oathkeeper tier 4. And we also see these significant jumps in damage too with the hipfire damage with Oathkeepers. Now let us combine the two to see what the max damage output looks like for Ticuu's with this Causality arrow buff and Oathkeeper's buff stacked with each other. Now, because this is an extremely tedious and long process to get each and every damage value at each tier of Oathkeepers with each stack of Causality, guys, there's like 60 different damage values here. It's a lot happening. We're just gonna show you the max damage it can hit. So Ticuu's Divination damage versus Carl, Oathkeeper plus Causality, a crit with tier 4 Oathkeeper charge plus Causality times 5 or times 6 hits for 44,289 damage. Now, this is a 280% increase over base Ticuu's crit, which is a good bit higher than the 150% buff that Oathkeeper starts off with. This is stacked on with the 101% buff from max Causality. Now, there is a strange bug, whether it's graphical or something bigger, that occurs when using Oathkeeper and any bow. We only notice this when going through footage frame by frame while doing these damage tests. For some reason, sometimes when you fire off an arrow with Oathkeepers, when that arrow hits the target, you'll have one frame of an incorrect damage number before it fixes itself, and then one frame later turns to the correct damage number, which is the one you actually see on the screen, at least for the longest. Just playing the game regularly, you're really not gonna notice this because it changes so quickly. We only realized this though when testing Ticuu's because we had a damage number that didn't fit in. It was way too high. And as we were combing through footage and jotting down damage numbers, we happened to pause the footage at just the right time where that one frame incorrect number was showing. And you're seeing what we're talking about on the screen as we speak. This happens with all bows with Oathkeepers, and the numbers go from being completely random to being a different damage number from having a different amount of Oathkeeper charge. For example, you fire off an arrow at tier 2 Oathkeeper charge, but there will be one frame where it shows tier 1 and its damage value before then finally switching to tier 2 just one frame later. Now we bring this up because we really don't know if this is actually affecting the damage Oathkeepers is supposed to be doing. And whether or not this is just an Oathkeepers bug, perhaps something graphical, we have no clue, but keep in mind, sometimes damage values in the game are weird. Y'all remember when we did damage testing way back when with Silk Strike? And even though the damage values on the post screen seem to be in line with other supers, the health bar of Templar was significantly lower than every other super we were comparing it to. Now at the time it was because the damage was just so much, the game just couldn't keep up with what was happening, or at least that's kind of what Bungie said. And I wish I can just offer you something definitive here, but all we can do in this situation is just present you with some of the issues we ran into when using Oathkeepers. Now back to Ticuu's. With max causality and with max Oathkeeper charge, you're looking at 44,289 damage. Now to keep this damage number going, you'll have to have perfect, and I mean perfect timing. Let's say you're going up against a boss. To first get the causality times 5, you'll have to hip fire to cause Sacred Flame, and then ADS to detonate it 5 times. That's 10 shots. Then to take advantage of Oathkeeper's damage buff, you'd have to hip fire Ticuu's to prime the boss with Sacred Flame, then load the next arrow and hold the draw until Oathkeeper reaches max charge before firing. This takes about 4 seconds, but 4 seconds is around the time Ticuu's causality buff ends. So the time window here is a tad bit unreasonable, at least for synergizing with Ticuu's. And then you're only really getting 44,000 damage with all of this stacked on top of each other. It's honestly way too much to pay attention to for it to be that little of a payout. You got Ticuu's gameplay loop to pay attention to, the causality buff duration to keep in mind, hitting targets that are unaffected by Sacred Flame to refresh the duration, then holding Oathkeepers until the bar on the left is completely full. It's quite a bit, guys. And the reason why we bring this up is because Wish Ender essentially allows you to do just as much damage with little to no setup, which takes us to Leviathan's Breath. Unfortunately, fellas, Leviathan's Breath does not get buffed by Oathkeepers. Now, this may be a bug or it may be intentional. And when we do the math, it would have been a beautiful thing to see Leviathan's Breath get buffed, because against Carl, it would have went from doing 53,442 damage to 133,605 damage. Now, Bungie has not said anything about this, and keep in mind, considering all the special effects from other bows are not benefiting from Oathkeepers, we have to assume that maybe Leviathan's Breath Explosion would also not be buffed, as adding that 81,958 damage onto here, we're looking at 215,000 damage per shot, which you can buff up even more with Void Weapon Surge. Hell, throw a tether in there. The single shot damage from Leviathan's Breath with a tier 4 Oathkeeper would be insane, which makes us wonder if this is actually intentional on Bungie's part. For now, there really is no reason to equip Oathkeepers with Leviathan's Breath. Now, where does that bring us now? Well, fellas, I'm sure you're wondering, Cross, why did you make this video if none of these bows synergize, or at least not easily synergize with Oathkeepers? Well, that's exactly why we put out a Wish Ender build first. We gave you the goods first, and a lot of you asked in that video why we didn't talk about other bows, and this is why. It's because the synergy here just isn't there. And even to some extent, Wish Ender doesn't fully synergize with Oathkeepers, but it does better than these other bows. Yes, we have legendary bows out there. Tyranny just got its stats bumped. We have a number of very good legendary bows that could benefit from Oathkeepers. But amongst our exotic bows, for now, until these other bows get looked at, Wish Ender plus Oathkeepers is currently the king. Well, fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching, and as always,
slap that like button like your mama told you right.